Hey guys! Tonight we begin not with kings' palaces or great empires, but with a caveman staring at a rock, wondering if eating it is a good idea. It's the Stone Age, where survival wasn't guaranteed, and sometimes the biggest threat wasn't a saber-toothed tiger, but your own bad decisions. The world is wild, dangerous, and full of dumb ways to die that make you thankful you weren't born a few thousand years earlier. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Let the quiet hum of the night surround you. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and stumble back into a world where curiosity, clumsiness, and very large animals didn't always end well. Congratulations. You've just joined the Stone Age, and you probably won't make it. The morning sun stretched lazily over the jagged ridges of the valley, spilling gold across jagged rocks and glinting off dew-soaked ferns. Smoke curled from several small fires, carrying the faintly sweet and slightly terrifying aroma of last night's roast mammoth. Somewhere in the distance, a saber-toothed cat yawned, and somewhere closer Gronk yawned too, brushing leaves from his shaggy hair and trying not to step in yesterday's surprise left by one of the younger cave children. Life was simple, raw, and mercilessly unpredictable, but to Gronk it was Tuesday. He sloshed toward the stream, barefoot on slippery stones, thinking maybe, just maybe, today he'd actually catch a fish instead of impaling his own foot again. Behind him, the rest of the tribe moved like a chaotic parade of survivalists, dragging skins, sticks, and the occasional hapless toddler who had wandered too close to the cliff edge. The air was filled with the grunts and chatter of people discovering that evolution had made the thinking part of their brains optional at best. It was a world full of danger, and even the safest place could be deadly if someone tripped while carrying a rock. Gronk crouched at the water's edge, brandishing his spear with the kind of serious concentration normally reserved for surgeons or people attempting to open wine bottles without a corkscrew. He aimed, thrust, and missed. The fish flopped mockingly away as Gronk's spear embedded itself firmly in his own toe. He let out a yelp that echoed against the cliff walls, startling a flock of birds, a small herd of deer, and one very confused mammoth in the distance. The tribe paused to watch, either horrified or amused, likely both, and someone muttered, "Maybe fishing is overrated." It wasn't just hunting that endangered life in hilariously preventable ways. Shelter had its own suite of hazards. The tribe's den was perched atop a cliff, chosen for great views of approaching predators, and good vibes. But cliffs, as it turns out, are terrible for balance. Every morning, someone would slip on loose rocks or fall while reaching for that stubborn berry bush that promised a sugar rush worth dying for. Evolution may have designed humans to be clever, but the cavemen had decided otherwise. Modern humans might worry about office ergonomics, cavemen worried about surviving their own curiosity. And fire was the love-hate relationship that defined daily life. It was warmth, light, and cooking power, all wrapped in a package that could singe hair, melt skins, and occasionally burn down the whole den if someone sneezed too vigorously. Drock, a young man with questionable judgment, had once attempted to light a fire with what he proudly called his improved flint. Within moments, flames had claimed half his hair and one eyebrow, and the resulting yelps had become a kind of morning alarm for the whole tribe. Watching someone accidentally barbecue themselves was apparently considered both entertaining and educational. By mid-morning, the tribe had migrated to a shallow cave near the river, ostensibly for safety, but mostly because the shade was nice and berries grew in abundance. Of course, berries came with a warning: eat too many, and hallucinations, stomach cramps, or an unfortunate head-first collision with a tree might follow. One particularly brave, or reckless, child learned this firsthand, running screaming through the ferns, certain that invisible tigers were chasing him. Modern humans might rely on caffeine or energy drinks for adventure. These kids relied on pure ignorance and a very flexible sense of survival. If fishing, cliffs, and berries weren't enough, there was the issue of accidental sports. The tribe invented for entertainment. They involved tossing stones at moving targets, which often included, unintentionally, one another. The first rule of caveman sports: aim vaguely, hope desperately. Resulting injuries ranged from bruises to the occasionally fatal, and everyone played anyway because apparently pain was optional and adrenaline was mandatory. Watching your cousin get concussed while attempting a friendly game of rock toss was probably the 10,000 BCE equivalent of watching someone crash their first car. Meanwhile, Gronk's day deteriorated further when he attempted to learn how to sharpen spears by rubbing flint against stone. He underestimated the force required. Sparks flew, flint shards embedded themselves in his hands, and he yelped again. The rest of the tribe laughed, or grimaced, which in practice looked the same, and offered exactly zero assistance. The lesson was clear in the Stone Age: mistakes were not just embarrassing, they were sometimes fatal. Modern humans complain about paper cuts. Gronk's version involved blood, rock shards, and very colorful language that might shock a Victorian. By afternoon, hunger gnawed at the tribe. They had abandoned fishing attempts, tripped off cliffs, and tested every berry with various degrees of regret. Hunting seemed like a reasonable plan, until someone remembered that mammoths were big, fast, and frequently in a bad mood. Still, Gronk volunteered, or was volunteered by social pressure, to chase a particularly slow mammoth calf. The chase involved mud, a lot of shouting, and one spectacular slip where Gronk ended up sliding down a hill into a thorn bush. The mammoth, unimpressed, wandered off, leaving the tribe's pride and dignity in tatters. You could almost see a modern sports commentator narrating the scene. And there goes Gronk, beautifully misjudging the terrain, folks. 10 out of 10 for style, 0 for survival. By late afternoon, the sun had started its slow descent, turning the valley golden and highlighting the smell of smoldering fires, crushed ferns, and the lingering scent of mildly roasted mammoth. The tribe, battered, bruised, and hungry, gathered for a communal attempt at cooking dinner without accidentally setting themselves on fire. Drock, who had learned nothing, insisted on demonstrating a safer fire-starting technique that promptly involved igniting a pile of dry leaves and nearly roasting the family pet. Gronk, covered in mud and scratches, wondered if modern humans had it easier with their fancy stove knobs and fire extinguishers. And yet, despite the chaos, there was a rhythm to the tribe's day, a rhythm punctuated by narrowly avoided disasters, hilarious misjudgments, and the occasional scream echoing across the cliffs. If they survived today, it would be sheer luck. If they didn't, well, at least it would make for a good story around the next campfire, assuming someone could carry on the tale. But danger was never far away. A simple misstep, a bad berry, or a distracted mammoth could turn the mundane into a fatal error in seconds. As evening approached, Gronk finally found a moment of quiet by the river, reflecting on the day's near-death experiences. The air was cooler now, carrying the soft murmur of the river and the distant howl of wolves. He realized that surviving the Stone Age wasn't about being clever or strong. It was about being slightly luckier than everyone else, and hoping that the stars, the rocks, and the occasional mammoth favored you today. Tomorrow promised new adventures and new, dumb ways to die. Perhaps someone would get caught in a mudslide, fall into a pit they didn't know existed, or attempt to wrestle a boar for dinner. If Gronk thought today was dangerous, he had no idea what tomorrow had in store. And if you think he had seen the worst yet, wait until you follow him to the Great Berry Massacre and discover just how creative the universe can be in inventing fatal mistakes. Night fell slowly over the valley, painting the jagged cliffs in shades of orange and deep purple, and the fires flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the uneven ground. The tribe had gathered near their largest fire, attempting to cook the day's meager catch of berries and scavenged meat without accidentally creating another Drock special fire incident. Smoke coiled into the sky, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of slightly charred skin, overcooked mammoth, and a hint of mud from countless slips earlier in the day. Somewhere, a small child giggled because he had managed to poke the family dog with a stick. The dog, unimpressed, responded with a growl that sounded suspiciously like, "I regret my life choices." A Gronk sat cross-legged near the fire, examining his finger, still tender from the spear incident, and wondering why the universe seemed determined to test him personally. Survival, it seemed, was a combination of luck, clumsiness, and what could generously be called trial by stupidity. He watched the elders instruct some younger tribe members on how to fashion spears properly. Of course, instructions were more like, wave this stick around and hope for the best. But apparently, hope was in abundant supply. The kids practiced with such enthusiasm that one managed to launch a sharpened spear directly into a pile of leaves, which promptly caught fire. From the corner of his eye, Gronk noticed Drock attempting to impress a group of onlookers by demonstrating his newly learned hunting technique. This involved crouching, swinging wildly, and yelling a lot. A small rabbit, poor victim of evolutionary timing, darted past him, only to be intercepted by Drock's flailing arm. It missed the rabbit but clipped the edge of a rock, sending sparks into the night air. Nearby, a woman named Zala shook her head, muttering, "Some things never change," which, when translated from caveman to modern sarcasm, basically meant congratulations, you're still terrible at life. If you think surviving the day had been tricky, try surviving the night. Darkness was both magical and terrifying. Magical in that you could see the stars without modern pollution. Terrifying in that you couldn't see wolves, bears, or, worse, other tribe members wandering around with torches and terrible coordination. One small accident, one misjudged step, and suddenly you were the unwitting star of a prehistoric horror story. Gronk, feeling philosophical, decided that being eaten by a predator was probably preferable to accidentally impaling yourself while trying to light another fire. As the night deepened, the tribe huddled together, sharing stories, some true, some exaggerated, and some entirely fabricated to scare the children. They laughed nervously about the day's events, each story punctuated by the occasional yelp or shout from someone testing the edge of their survival instincts. Imagine a modern sitcom where every episode someone almost dies from the most ridiculous causes. Then multiply that by 10, and you begin to understand the sheer absurdity of daily life in the Stone Age. Meanwhile, Gronk's thoughts drifted to food. Specifically, the audible options they had left. Berries were half mystery, half nightmare, mushrooms could be nutritious, poisonous, or hallucinogenic. And no one ever seemed to know until after someone tried one. He recalled a lesson learned the hard way when a relative ate a mushroom and promptly started seeing glowing, flying mammoths. It was fascinating and horrifying simultaneously. Modern humans might complain about kale smoothies or kombucha, but at least their beverages weren't likely to produce psychedelic hallucinations or death. As the fire crackled, the tribe's chief, a grizzled man with scars, wisdom, and the unfortunate habit of telling the same, "You'll die doing something dumb," story every night, rose to speak. He recounted, with the gravitas of someone narrating the apocalypse, a tale of a young hunter who had attempted to climb a tree to get a bird's nest, only to fall headfirst into a mud pit, breaking both arms and losing dignity in equal measure. The tribe laughed, though laughter was mixed with the faintest whiff of sympathy. Or maybe relief that it wasn't them. It was an early form of entertainment. Teach through humiliation, learn through fear. By midnight, the moon hung high and full, illuminating the valley in a silver glow. Shadows danced as Gronk's mind wandered. He imagined modern humans with their fluorescent lights, climate-controlled rooms, and ergonomic chairs, and he shivered, partly from cold, partly from the absurd realization that they had it easy. If only they knew how close to death they really were every day, just by existing, eating, or standing too close to a cliff edge. Gronk, by contrast, had to navigate life with mud-streaked vision, fire hazards, and an uncanny talent for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The night brought its own soundtrack, distant howls, the occasional roar of a saber tooth, and the rustle of leaves that may, or may not, hide a predator. Sleep was precarious, a luxury earned by careful observation and positioning. One wrong roll in the middle of the night, one poorly placed elbow, and you could wake up bruised, scratched, or worse. Gronk lay on his animal hide, listening to the night, and thought about tomorrow. He knew, deep in his gut, that the universe was already planning new ways to challenge his survival instincts, and probably make him look ridiculous in the process. By early morning, the first rays of sunlight had touched the valley again, spilling over rocks and ferns, glinting off the stream. Drock was already awake, attempting to sharpen a spear while balancing on a log, an act that was equal parts ambition and potential self-destruction. Nearby, a small child was attempting to imitate him, wielding a stick like a seasoned hunter, and promptly tripped over nothing in particular, landing in a puddle. Gronk, brushing leaves from his hair and nursing his bruises, watched it all unfold, realizing that some lessons were learned too late, or not at all. It was a pattern the tribe seemed destined to repeat indefinitely: wake, almost die in spectacular ways, learn nothing and repeat. Accidents caused by cliffs, fire, berries, and bad luck were everyday occurrences. But somehow, against all odds, some survived, and those survivors carried on the tales, exaggerating details to keep the next generation on its toes. Modern humans might call it evolution, the tribe called it Tuesday, and as the sun climbed higher, promising another day full of danger, discovery, and dumb mistakes, one could almost hear the universe chuckling. If today's hazards, mudslides, spears, fire, and hallucinogenic mushrooms weren't enough to terrify and amuse, wait until the tribe attempts to invent tools that may or may not have been intended for self-preservation. Tomorrow's stupidity would make today look like child's play, and the next, dumbest way to die, was already waiting in the shadows. The morning stretched into late afternoon, and the tribe, battered but not broken, attempted to resume the day's activities. Gronk, still wincing from the spear incident, and a collision with a particularly uncooperative boulder, decided to practice climbing, a decision historians would later call ambitious, and survival experts would call reckless. The cliff loomed above him, its jagged edges catching sunlight and promising either a spectacular view or a spectacular demise. He grasped a ledge, swung one leg up, and slipped. One hand scraped against rough stone, another flailed in the air, and gravity did the rest. He landed in a bush with a thud, yelping as leaves and sticks assaulted every exposed patch of skin. Nearby, Drock tried to help, only to lose balance and tumble into the stream. Soaking himself completely, the child who had been watching promptly followed suit, mistaking the chaos for a fun game, and the three of them ended up in a tangled heap, laughing, groaning, and mildly terrified. Modern humans might call it a water park disaster. Cavemen called it life. Hungry, bruised, and smelling faintly of mud and roasted mammoth, the tribe turned their attention to constructing more sophisticated tools, by which they meant sticks with sharp rocks attached to them. They debated fiercely over which rock was optimal for hunting, which stick offered the best leverage, and whether or not the whole idea of using rocks attached to sticks was slightly flawed. Gronk, ever the pragmatist, thought maybe the whole survival thing was overrated, and yet the universe had more lessons to teach. A small incident involving a misjudged river crossing demonstrated that running water, slippery stones, and overconfidence were a lethal combination. Gronk attempted to jump from one rock to another, fully expecting to land gracefully like a prehistoric ninja. He did not. The water embraced him, cold and muddy, and carried him downstream for several glorious seconds before he flopped onto the bank, sputtering and soaked, while the tribe laughed, or at least laughed enough to remind themselves they were still alive. The child who had been watching considered imitating him, but wisely decided that learning through observation was probably safer than participation. As night approached again, fire became both friend and nemesis. Drock, who had not learned from the previous day's hair on fire incident, tried to start another blaze, this time using dry reeds and a particularly combustible mushroom he found. Within moments, smoke curled high into the sky, and the entire tribe coughed, waved their hands desperately, and considered briefly abandoning camp. Someone muttered that modern humans complaining about house fires were lucky they didn't have Drock around. The mushroom exploded in a minor puff, and for the briefest moment, Gronk considered that maybe, just maybe, life in the Stone Age was one long tutorial on how to die creatively. Meanwhile, the elders of the tribe engaged in an early form of council, debating the merits of various life-saving inventions. The ideas ranged from sharp sticks to wearable furs that doubled as armor, though mostly doubled as tripping hazards, and from fire-making techniques to strategic berry placement to avoid accidental hallucinations. Every suggestion was immediately tested, unsurprisingly, often with disastrous results. A young apprentice tried to fashion a spear with 3 prongs for better catching efficiency, and promptly skewered a pile of mud instead. If modern humans complained about assembly instructions for IKEA furniture, they would have screamed at this process. By nightfall, the tribe had learned several key lessons, none of which would likely save their lives in the long term. They discovered that cliffs were still dangerous. Berries could be both friend and foe, and spear sharpening required both precision and a strong dose of luck. They also confirmed that Drock was still a hazard. The river was treacherous, and that laughter, even at someone else's misfortune, was surprisingly therapeutic. Gronk, tired, bruised, and slightly wiser, lay on his animal hide, staring at the stars and wondering how the world could be so simultaneously beautiful and cruel. And yet, survival had a way of teaching resilience through comedy. The tribe's mistakes were absurd, their near deaths ridiculous, but they endured. Each misadventure, slips, falls, accidental impalements, fires, and mushroom-induced hallucinations, became part of their collective memory, a story to retell around the next fire. The absurdity of it all was both a warning and a comfort. If they could laugh at themselves, perhaps they could survive another day. Tomorrow promised even stranger challenges. There would be encounters with new animals, misjudged hunts, and experiments with tools and fire that might redefine the meaning of dangerously creative. The universe seemed to be preparing something especially inventive, a calamity so perfectly dumb that it would make today's misadventures look like child's play. Gronk, blissfully unaware, had no idea that the Great Berry Massacre and the accidental mammoth chase were already waiting just beyond the next ridge. And so, as the fire dimmed and the night creatures began their chorus, the tribe huddled together, sharing warmth, injuries, and laughter. Life was precarious, chaotic, and absurd. But in that very chaos lay the essence of their existence. The universe had invented countless ways to die, and yet somehow they survived, at least for now. If you think this day was full of foolish and dangerous exploits, wait until you follow Gronk and the tribe into the sticky, stinky, and utterly hilarious world of tribal hygiene rituals, and the next wave of prehistoric misadventures. The sun rose lazily over the valley once more, spilling golden light across jagged cliffs and dew-laden ferns. Birds sang as if oblivious to the constant chaos that defined the lives of the tribe below. Gronk, still nursing bruises from yesterday's spear, mudslide, and accidental mammoth chase, stretched with a groan. His muscles protested, his skin itched from insect bites, and his hair, well, it looked like a nest for small animals. Today, he thought, he would attempt something daring, personal hygiene. The tribe, for all its survival skills, had an unusual relationship with cleanliness. Water was for drinking, swimming was dangerous, and bathing, well, bathing was considered an extreme sport that carried with it a very high probability of either freezing to death, being eaten, or accidentally drowning. Yet somehow, the elders insisted that cleanliness was necessary, perhaps because no one could survive for long with the smell of unwashed, woolly mammoth fur clinging to everything they touched. Gronk ambled toward the stream, wincing with each step as his foot throbbed from the previous spear mishap. He paused to consider the logistics. How do you wash without slipping, falling, or washing away your dignity entirely? A small child watched him curiously, holding a stick like a weapon, ready to assist, in ways that history would kindly forget. Nearby, Drock had already taken the plunge, literally. He had waded into the water, arms flailing, and promptly slipped, sending a spray of icy stream over his face, and drenching several unsuspecting amphibians. He emerged triumphant, hair slicked back, looking for all the world like someone who had just stepped out of a spa brochure. If that brochure also included blood, mud, and very unhappy frogs. The tribe, observing from the bank, murmured quietly to each other, which translated roughly to, well, at least he's alive for now. Hygiene in the Stone Age was hazardous beyond imagination. The tribe had devised crude brushes from twigs, leaves, and occasional animal hair, which sometimes worked as intended, and sometimes doubled as a way to exfoliate and scar simultaneously. Gronk experimented cautiously, scratching his scalp, only to find a small nest of insects that immediately scattered in a frenzy. One particularly brave tick refused to leave, making eye contact like it knew this was its home. Modern humans might complain about lice shampoo commercials. Gronk had none, and survival was optional. The ritual of teeth cleaning was equally dramatic. Sharp sticks were used to scrape at teeth, with varying success. Gronk tried it, poking at a molar with focused intensity, only to discover that one wrong twist sent him gagging and spitting a mix of water, leaf bits, and something vaguely alarming that may have been yesterday's dinner. Nearby, Zala muttered that Cavemen complaining about dentists today clearly hadn't lived yet. Gronk grunted in agreement, silently noting that the invention of toothpaste, floss, and mouthwash was a minor miracle in human history. Bathing in the stream, of course, wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a gauntlet of possible death. One misstep could lead to broken bones, hypothermia, or an accidental splash in a place that would instantly ruin your dignity. While Gronk attempted to scrub his hair, Jock tried to demonstrate an advanced move, jumping onto a rock mid-stream while simultaneously washing his armpits. He promptly slipped, flailed, and landed on his backside with a loud thwack, sending water and mud flying across 3 meters of stream. The child observer applauded enthusiastically, clearly thinking this was a successful performance. But it wasn't just accidents. Hygiene rituals often involved insects, mud, and questionable natural remedies. A supposedly cleansing mud mask left on the face for 5 minutes could result in mild hallucinations or skin irritation, depending on the composition of the clay and whatever organic material had previously taken residence in it. Gronk, curious, dipped his face in a nearby patch and emerged looking like a prehistoric raccoon, blinking rapidly and inhaling a mix of dirt, leaves, and mild panic. The others roared with laughter, which in Stone Age terms translated as "You are temporarily safe, enjoy it while it lasts." As mid-morning arrived, the sun warming the valley and insects buzzing angrily around their ears, the tribe began experimenting with hair grooming. Long hair was fashionable, at least, according to whoever decided that hair held social power, but brushing it without proper tools was a dangerous endeavor. Sticks, rocks, and leaves doubled as brushes, combs, or occasionally weapons. One ambitious tribe member tried to braid his hair while holding a sharp stone in his teeth, an idea that history would kindly note as overambitious and highly ill-advised. The resulting tangle, punctuated with screams and muttered curses, left him looking like a prehistoric porcupine. By noon it was clear that survival was only marginally connected to skill, and mostly linked to luck, improvisation, and an uncanny ability to ignore pain. Gronk and the others paused for a quick snack of berries and roasted roots, both of which carried their own hazards. Berries were sometimes hallucinogenic, sometimes mildly toxic, and sometimes just plain delicious if you didn't die immediately after eating them. The roasted roots, while safer, could splinter teeth or lodge themselves painfully in the gums. Gronk chewed carefully, eyeing Jock suspiciously as he gnawed enthusiastically on a particularly sharp root, muttering that perhaps modern humans should consider having it easy with prepackaged snacks. If bathing, hair grooming, and teeth cleaning weren't enough to occupy their survival attention, the river itself had ideas. Currents, slippery rocks, and small, but aggressive, fish turned the seemingly peaceful water into a minor gauntlet of near-death experiences. Gronk nearly lost a sandal attempting to retrieve a stray berry, only to be saved by a timely grab from Zala, whose patience for clumsy antics was questionable at best. Modern humans complain about slipping in the shower. This was the Stone Age version, with higher stakes and more bruises. By mid-afternoon the sun had climbed high, casting harsh shadows across the rocky terrain, and heating the river to a temperature just tolerable enough to encourage reckless behavior. Gronk, having survived mud, water, and a near collision with a rather territorial frog, decided to attempt what could only be called an experimental bath. The concept was simple. Submerge oneself fully, scrub vigorously with leaves, and hope that nothing in the water decided it had become dinner. Of course, nothing in life is simple in the Stone Age. The moment Gronk leaned into the stream, a sudden rush of water sent him tumbling forward, headfirst, into a patch of reeds. A small fish darted past, accidentally bumping his nose, causing him to inhale a mouthful of water. He sputtered, coughed, and managed to emerge looking like a soggy, greenish statue. Observers on the bank, Jock and a child attempting to emulate bravery, burst into laughter, their collective mirth echoing across the valley. The child, thinking imitation was the sincerest form of flattery, attempted to replicate Gronk's feat, slipping immediately and landing in the mud with a satisfying splat. Meanwhile, the topic of hair maintenance had taken on a life of its own. Zola, an elder with a sharp eye for aesthetics and a limited tolerance for chaos, decided to teach the younger tribe members how to braid their hair using vines. The problem, naturally, was that vines are strong, awkward, and unforgiving. One ambitious apprentice found himself tied up in a knot, so severe that he needed the assistance of 3 tribe members and a sharp rock to extricate himself. Gronk, watching this unfold, reflected on how much simpler life might be if humans had invented hairbands, combs, or literally anything beyond twigs and leaves. Not content to merely survive, the tribe also experimented with herbal remedies for skin care. A combination of mud, crushed berries, and a few unidentified plants was spread liberally across faces and arms. The results were unpredictable. Some emerged with slightly cleaner skin, others with mild rashes, and one unfortunate soul developed temporary green spots that glowed faintly in the sun. Modern humans complain about beauty tutorials online, but at least their mistakes don't involve untested clay mixtures that could poison you, stain your hide, or attract angry insects. As the day wore on, the river revealed itself to be less peaceful than it seemed. Rocks that looked stable were treacherously slick, and currents that appeared shallow were actually capable of sweeping a careless tribe member downstream. Gronk had already tested this theory once, and had a vague memory of swallowing water while trying to retrieve a rogue berry. Now, he watched as Drock, emboldened by overconfidence, attempted a mid-river balancing act, only to plunge headfirst into the current, arms flailing like a particularly frantic octopus. Rescue attempts involved mud, shouting, and a lot of slipping, but somehow both survived, barely. The sun began its slow descent, turning the valley golden and illuminating the aftermath of the day's hygiene rituals. Leaves littered the ground, muddy footprints trailed in every direction, and small creatures scuttled away from humans whose scent was likely unforgettable. Despite everything, laughter echoed among the tribe. Life in the Stone Age was a constant negotiation with danger, and humor was the only reliable tool to prevent despair. Evening brought another set of challenges. The tribe gathered near their fire, attempting to prepare a meal, while also drying off and untangling hair. Someone had the brilliant idea of roasting roots and berries together. A culinary experiment that ended with half the meal in ashes, and the other half tasting like disappointment. Modern humans complain about burnt toast. This was burnt dinner, with real consequences. Starvation and minor food poisoning were both plausible outcomes. As night fell, Gronk reclined on his animal hide, looking at the stars reflected in the river, and reflected on the absurdity of the day. The universe seemed to take pleasure in inventing new ways for humans to test their luck. Cliffs, rivers, fire, berries, mud, and overambitious hair experiments had all conspired to make survival a precarious and often laughable affair. Yet, somehow they endured, but the universe wasn't done. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the flickering light of their fire, a new hazard waited: sharp rocks hidden beneath leaves, predators wandering closer than usual, and a sudden storm that could turn their carefully constructed camp into a perilous mudslide. Gronk, blissfully unaware, drifted into uneasy sleep while small creatures rustled in the shadows and the river whispered ominously. Tomorrow promised yet more opportunities for mistakes, misjudgments, and the creative accidents that the Stone Age seemed to specialize in. If the first 2 days were any indication, no amount of caution would protect the tribe from the inventive and unpredictable hazards awaiting them. And if you think slipping into a river or green mud masks were the pinnacle of their misadventures, wait until the tribe faces their next challenge: the chaotic, surprisingly dangerous, and utterly ridiculous world of early hunting techniques, where one wrong step could mean the difference between a meal and a minor disaster, or a very permanent one. The dawn was crisp, with a thin mist hanging over the valley like a warning sign that no one understood. Gronk stretched and groaned, his muscles still sore from the previous day's mud dives, spear mishaps, and accidental floundering in the river. He had survived, barely, but today promised to be another test of luck, skill, and the human propensity for catastrophically bad ideas. Hunting was on the agenda, a necessary activity for food, survival, and tribal bragging rights. Gronk Drock, and a few of the younger tribe members set off with spears, crude clubs, and a level of confidence that belied their track record of spectacularly failing at anything requiring coordination. The morning air smelled of wet earth, dew, and the faintly alarming odor of something recently deceased, either a small animal or someone's unfortunate toe incident. The plan was simple. If you ignored the history of human stupidity, find a mammal, corner it, and somehow convince it to surrender without killing the hunter. Gronk had his doubts. Modern humans might consider hunting a weekend activity with a store-bought license and safety courses. The tribe considered it a competitive sport in which death was always a possible outcome and dignity was optional. The first encounter came sooner than expected. A small herd of deer grazed in the distance, blissfully unaware of the approaching humans, armed with sticks and rocks. Gronk motioned for stealth, crouching low behind a bush while simultaneously trying not to crush it entirely. Drock, ever enthusiastic, misjudged the concept of silent approach, and tripped over a root, sending a cascade of leaves and branches crashing down. The deer bolted, startled, leaving the tribe staring at nothing but empty grass. Gronk sighed. The deer had apparently passed judgment on their hunting skills, and found them wanting. Undeterred, the tribe moved on. Gronk spotted a wild boar rooting near the riverbank, a large, muscular creature with tusks that could double as prehistoric fencing equipment. The idea of hunting it seemed simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. Drock suggested flanking the animal, which involved running through dense brush, shouting, and waving their arms like hyperactive windmills. The boar, unimpressed, charged almost immediately. Chaos ensued. Gronk dodged a tusk, slipped on a mossy rock, and ended up face first in a puddle of mud. Drock collided with a tree, leaving a dent in both his pride and his shoulder. The child observer shrieked, ducked, and fell backward into the stream. At this point, the boar, apparently unconcerned with civility, ran straight past the hunters and disappeared into the underbrush, leaving a trail of mud, bruised egos, and broken sticks. The tribe regrouped, drenched in sweat, mud, and minor humiliation. Modern humans complain about sports injuries. The tribe had an entire repertoire of bruises that made today's minor cuts look like mere scratches. Gronk, lying flat on his back and breathing heavily, wondered how anyone could survive being a caveman. Not to be outdone, the younger members attempted to hunt rabbits. Small, fast, and deceptively clever creatures that apparently had been studying evasive maneuvers for millennia. One child launched a spear, missing by several feet and almost impaling Gronk in the process. The rabbit disappeared into a hole, leaving the hunter holding a stick like a confused magician and Gronk muttering under his breath about the advantages of domestication. Meanwhile, Drock, still determined to prove his worth, spotted a group of wild turkeys strutting across the plain. He attempted a stealthy approach, crouching, tiptoeing, and making noises that sounded suspiciously like, "I'm about to die." The turkeys, showing remarkable intelligence and a sense of comedic timing, scattered in every direction, leaving Drock face planting in a patch of nettles. The child observer, now thoroughly convinced that hunting was the most dangerous sport imaginable, took notes for future reference, or perhaps a cautionary story for next week's fire circle. The mid-morning sun climbed higher, heating the valley and the nerves of anyone attempting to hunt. Gronk and Drock took a brief pause near a large boulder, catching their breath and contemplating life choices. The air was thick with the smell of mud, sweat, and animal musk, which modern humans would probably pay good money to avoid in a spa setting. Gronk wiped his face, considering the possibility that the boar, deer, rabbits, and turkeys had formed a secret alliance against the tribe, designed purely to humiliate them and preserve their own survival. Even with all their failures, the tribe continued, because starvation was a greater threat than embarrassment. They tracked a small herd of goats up a ridge, navigating loose rocks, sharp shrubs, and the occasional insect attack. Gronk slipped once, caught himself just in time, and muttered something that historians would later translate as, "Why am I still alive?" Drock, meanwhile, attempted to vault a small stream, and landed in a puddle on the other side, emerging triumphant, if dripping and slightly stunned. By midday, the hunters had exhausted themselves and achieved remarkably little beyond bruises, scrapes, and a series of increasingly absurd near-death experiences. They returned to camp with empty hands, empty stomachs, and full awareness that life in the Stone Age had a cruel sense of humor. Gronk, mud-streaked and wary, decided that perhaps inventing fire or mastering the art of berry picking might be safer pursuits than hunting large mammals. Yet, the universe had other plans. A shadow moved across the cliff above them. A predator, larger and more agile than anything they had yet encountered. The tribe froze, realizing that their hunting misadventures had left them remarkably exposed. Gronk's mind raced. Could they escape? Could Drock refrain from flailing into more danger? Could the child observer survive another terrifying lesson in natural selection? The answers, as always, depended on luck, timing, and the ability to look ridiculous while doing so. The shadow on the cliff wasn't subtle. Gronk squinted, realizing with growing horror that it belonged to a large predator, a mountain lion, sleek, deadly, and clearly in a mood to remind the tribe that gravity, claws, and teeth were not optional. The air grew tense, thick with the scent of wet earth, animal musk, and primal fear. Even Drock, who usually radiated overconfidence, froze mid-motion, his jaw slack and his spear held awkwardly like a flag signaling surrender. The predator descended slowly, muscles rippling, eyes locked on the tribe. Gronk, thinking fast, or at least as fast as a mud-streaked, sore-footed caveman could, attempted a strategic retreat. Unfortunately, retreat in the Stone Age meant dodging loose rocks, uneven ground, and the occasional over-enthusiastic child who insisted on following. The result was a chaotic scramble, with limbs flailing, mud flying, and a lot of grunting that sounded suspiciously like panic translated into survival. Drock attempted to wave the spear threateningly. The mountain lion, unimpressed, gave a low growl, its tail flicking with dangerous amusement. One of the younger hunters, emboldened, or perhaps delirious from exhaustion, shouted a challenge. The mountain lion paused, tilting its head in curiosity, giving the tribe a brief and merciful moment to reconsider their life choices. Gronk seized the opportunity. He grabbed a rock roughly the size of a small mammoth kidney and hurled it, aiming for a distraction rather than injury. The rock bounced off a tree, narrowly missing Drock's head, and rolled harmlessly away. The lion, apparently unconcerned by human theatrics, crouched, preparing to spring. In a moment that could only be described as instinctual and borderline miraculous, the child observer screamed and tripped over a stick, landing face first in mud. The lion, startled by the combined chaos, paused, giving Gronk and the tribe a chance to retreat uphill, slipping and sliding in equal measure. By the time they reached a slightly safer ridge, the predator had disappeared into the shadows, leaving the tribe gasping, covered in mud, and questioning every decision that had led them to this point. Gronk, wiping a smear of mud from his face, considered writing a strongly worded letter to evolution, expressing dissatisfaction with the current curriculum. Drock, meanwhile, was brushing leaves out of his hair and muttering about how this was all part of the adventure. Hungry, exhausted, and increasingly aware of their mortality, the tribe decided to attempt smaller, safer hunts, squirrels, birds, and other minor prey that required more cunning than brute strength. Of course, safe in the Stone Age was a relative term. Squirrels, though tiny, proved incredibly fast and capable of evading spears by sheer unpredictability. Birds could fly, dive, and occasionally peck fingers in retaliation. Gronk found himself cornered by a particularly aggressive pheasant, which hopped and squawked in a way that suggested both insult and amusement. Meanwhile, Drock had discovered a nest of eggs. He reached carefully, intent on securing a future breakfast, and promptly triggered a minor avalanche of sticks, leaves, and one very disgruntled bird, which sent him sprawling down a slope. The child observer, eager to help, attempted to intervene and ended up tangled in a bush. Gronk could only watch, sighing deeply, as chaos unfolded with the precision of a slapstick performance choreographed by nature itself. By late afternoon, the hunters had achieved two things: exhaustion and the realization that survival required more cunning than they possessed. Gronk sat on a rock, surveying the valley, mud-streaked, bruised, and slightly traumatized, while Drock licked a minor scratch and muttered, "Well, get them next time." Gronk was unconvinced. Then came the true test. A distant roar echoed across the valley. A mammoth. Not a calm, grazing mammoth, but a charging, angry adult, evidently disturbed by the morning's commotion. The ground trembled with each step, sending birds into a panicked frenzy. Gronk and the tribe froze, realizing that running downhill, while being chased by a mammoth, was vastly different from yesterday's misadventures. The difference, they quickly discovered, was that gravity and speed were now actively trying to remove them from existence. Chaos erupted. Gronk dove sideways, narrowly avoiding a tree, while Drock attempted to climb a small boulder for safety, only to slip halfway up and hang precariously. The child observer screamed, grabbed Gronk's leg, and slid partially down the hill, mud and leaves creating a makeshift but uncomfortable landing pad. The mammoth thundered past, tusks glinting, leaving behind a trail of flattened bushes, displaced rocks, and what historians would later call near misses on a biblical scale. The tribe regrouped, hearts racing, faces covered in mud, and clothes soaked with sweat. Silence fell for a brief moment, punctuated only by the occasional grunt of exhaustion and the distant sound of the mammoth wandering off. Gronk looked at his companions, silently acknowledging a universal truth: hunting, predators, cliffs, and large angry herbivores all conspired to make survival simultaneously hilarious and terrifying. As dusk approached, the tribe made their way back to camp, covered in bruises, scratches, and minor psychological trauma. They were alive, yes, but just barely, and they were acutely aware that tomorrow promised a new set of challenges. Cliffs, rivers, and predators were predictable in comparison to what they would soon discover about accidental encounters with venomous creatures, poorly constructed shelters, and the occasional cave-in. And so, as the fire flickered and the stars began to appear, the tribe settled down, bruised but grateful for the small gift of continued existence. Gronk, reflecting on the day's chaos, realized that life in the Stone Age was one long sequence of narrowly avoided disasters, each more absurd than the last. Tomorrow, he thought, might finally offer a brief reprieve, though he suspected that the universe had other, far more ridiculous plans. If you think being chased by mammoths, dodging mountain lions, and flailing at pheasants was dangerous, wait until you follow the tribe into the next adventure. The perils of prehistoric shelter, where flimsy constructions, sudden storms, and a surprising amount of human error threaten to turn their already chaotic lives into something even more spectacularly disastrous. The morning sun cast a soft glow across the valley, illuminating jagged cliffs, dew-specked ferns, and most importantly, the precarious structures the tribe had cobbled together as shelters. To the modern eye, these constructions might resemble elaborate piles of sticks, mud, and questionable optimism. To the tribe, they were a lifeline, a place to sleep, store food, and avoid accidental encounters with predators, cliffs, or the occasional overly ambitious river. Gronk surveyed the camp, scratching his head. His own shelter, a haphazard arrangement of branches leaning against a rock, looked less like a home and more like a monument to miscalculation. Inside, a layer of moss, mud, and half-dried leaves provided the kind of comfort that could only be described as precariously adequate. The moment he settled, he realized that comfort was relative. The slightest nudge of a branch sent a rain of twigs down onto his head, prompting a series of muffled curses that the nearby child interpreted as a language lesson. The tribe gathered for a shelter council, led by the ever-authoritative Zala. She was determined to improve the dwellings before the next inevitable storm. Her plan was simple in theory: stronger frames, better roofs, and reinforced walls to withstand wind, rain, and the occasional panicked mammoth. Execution, however, required a combination of raw strength, careful balance, and luck, qualities the tribe had consistently demonstrated in limited quantities. Drock, naturally, volunteered first. He decided to build a tall lean to that reached heights that historians would later describe as unnecessarily ambitious. The base was shaky, the branches barely tied together, and the roof seemed to rely more on hope than physics. Gronk watched as Drock climbed onto the structure, soared at a branch with a sharp rock, and promptly fell through the frame, landing in a pile of mud with a scream that would echo in the valley for days. The child observer, who had been watching with wide-eyed fascination, promptly attempted to replicate the climb, stopping halfway when gravity reminded him that ambition has consequences. Meanwhile, smaller construction disasters unfolded around the camp. A wall built from mud and sticks collapsed under the weight of a particularly large boulder placed on top. For stability, burying half the moss lining beneath an impressive mound of debris. Gronk muttered something that historians would later interpret as, "Why is survival like this?" while carefully extracting his fingers from a particularly sticky patch of mud. Modern humans might complain about IKEA furniture instructions. The tribe was inventing a more chaotic form of assembly from scratch, under duress, and with a high probability of injury. By midday the sun had climbed high, heating the valley, and the egos of anyone attempting construction. Gronk attempted to reinforce his own shelter, tying branches together with vines. One slip sent a branch swinging, narrowly missing his head, but demolishing the side wall of his neighbor's tent. The neighbor, predictably, responded with a string of grunts, gestures, and what could generously be called threatening eye contact. Drock, oblivious as ever, decided to install a second roof layer atop his already collapsing lean-to, which promptly shifted, sending a cascade of leaves and mud across his face. Storm clouds began to gather on the horizon, a rolling, ominous reminder that nature had a sense of humor, and that the tribe's shelters were only as strong as the mud, sticks, and luck they were built upon. A sudden gust of wind rattled the flimsy frames, sending vines snapping and branches swaying dangerously. Gronk clutched his shelter like a drowning man clings to driftwood, while Drock, balancing precariously on his second roof layer, shouted something that may have been, "I'm fine," but was mostly unintelligible panic. The first drops of rain fell, soft at first, then increasingly insistent. Mud walls softened, sticks shifted, and the lean-to structures groaned as if voicing their own complaints. The tribe scrambled, dragging rocks, adding vines, and attempting to hold structures upright with their combined body weight. Gronk considered that if modern humans thought DIY home projects were dangerous, they had clearly never tried building with unprocessed sticks in the middle of a thunderstorm. By late afternoon, the storm hit with full force. Rain poured, wind howled, and branches threatened to snap under pressure. Gronk huddled under a partially intact roof, dripping wet, while Drock attempted to secure a tarp, like arrangement of leaves that promptly blew away, landing somewhere near the river with a satisfying splash. The child observer screamed, slipped in the mud, and landed in a puddle, adding minor injury to the day's disasters. Amidst the chaos, the tribe realized that some shelters were collapsing entirely. One lean-to, previously described as optimistically tall, fell sideways with a crash that sent sticks and mud flying into the air. Modern humans might call this a structural failure. The tribe called it a lesson in humility. Gronk ducked under a partially intact branch, narrowly avoiding a blunt injury, and muttered what could be translated as, "Tomorrow, I will invent nails." Even as the storm raged, small triumphs emerged. A few shelters survived, albeit barely. A handful of correctly placed vines held walls together, and Gronk discovered that a strategic combination of mud and careful weight distribution could make a shelter slightly less likely to collapse, though not immune to the wrath of nature or human error. By evening, the storm began to wane, leaving the valley muddy-drenched and eerily quiet. The tribe gathered around the surviving fire, exhausted, soaked, and proud that they were still alive. Gronk reflected on the day's chaos construction disasters. Falling branches, flying mud, and near-death experiences had provided yet another reminder that survival was a full-time exercise in improvisation and humility. And yet, the universe had more plans. Somewhere in the darkening valley, beyond the flickering firelight, another hazard lurked: sharp rocks, sudden landslides, and perhaps the first encounter with venomous creatures, ready to test the tribe's luck and resourcefulness once again. Gronk, blissfully unaware, drifted into uneasy sleep, knowing only that tomorrow would demand every ounce of cunning, courage, and absurd bravery he could muster. If you think collapsing shelters and torrential storms were enough to challenge the tribe, wait until you follow them into the next disaster. Accidental encounters with prehistoric venom and hidden hazards, where mud, rocks, and creatures combine into an experience that is simultaneously terrifying, ridiculous, and impossible to ignore. The night stretched on, and the storm showed no mercy. The wind shrieked like a chorus of angry mammoths, bending sticks and tearing at the fragile vines, holding the tribe's shelters together. Gronk, half buried under a collapsing lean-to, attempted to free himself without dislodging any additional branches. An almost impossible task. Above him, Drog yelped as a roof beam snapped, landing inches away in a mud-splattered arc. It was at this moment that the child observer decided shelter construction might be overrated, and opted to hide under a particularly large leaf. Rivers of mud formed around their camp, turning the valley floor into a slippery obstacle course. Attempting to move without falling became a full-time job, requiring balance, strategy, and a bit of luck that the universe seemed to deny. Gronk slipped once, narrowly avoiding a sharp rock, and ended up tangled in vines that had once been part of a partially standing shelter. As he untangled himself, he realized that the only thing keeping him upright was a combination of stubbornness, adrenaline, and the vague hope that trees had mercy on fools. The storm tested every inch of their constructions. Lean-tos buckled, mud walls sagged, and a particularly ambitious double-roof attempt collapsed entirely, sending a wave of sticks and soggy leaves cascading onto Drog, who emerged looking like a drowned porcupine with a newfound appreciation for structural integrity. Gronk muttered under his breath about how modern humans had it easy with nails, screws, and instructions in languages that didn't require interpretive gymnastics. Amid the chaos, the tribe discovered new hazards. Sharp rocks hidden in mud claimed a few toes, while slippery branches created impromptu catapults of debris. Even the fire, an element they had mastered with marginal success, became a danger as embers flew unpredictably and smoke stung their eyes. The smell of wet moss, mud, and burnt leaves mingled with the faint tang of fear, creating a sensory experience that was both terrifying and absurd. Yet, in the midst of destruction, moments of humor persisted. Drog attempted to rescue a particularly stubborn branch, and ended up flailing spectacularly into the mud, sending water and dirt flying over Gronk and the child observer. The child, trying to help, slipped on the mud and landed atop Drog, creating a tangled heap of limbs, mud, and unintelligible screaming. Gronk could only shake his head, muttering something about why evolution allowed humans to be so spectacularly clumsy. By early morning, the storm began to subside, leaving a landscape that resembled a battlefield more than a campsite. Shelters were flattened. Mud covered nearly everything, and the tribe emerged bruised, soaked, and exhausted, but remarkably alive. They surveyed the damage with grim amusement, realizing that their attempts at fortification had done little more than provide a temporary illusion of safety. As the sun rose, casting light over the soggy ruins, the tribe began salvaging what they could. Twigs were repurposed, mud reshaped, and vines retied with a combination of hope and stubbornness. Gronk, brushing leaves from his hair, contemplated the absurdity of their existence. A day spent constructing, defending, and surviving shelters had left them more tired than any hunt or predator encounter. Even in the aftermath, the universe had one final joke. A small landslide on the ridge above their camp sent a cascade of dirt and pebbles tumbling down, narrowly missing Drog, who leapt sideways with the grace of someone who had learned all the wrong lessons from yesterday. Gronk, holding a branch as a makeshift shield, ducked instinctively, muttering about how humans complaining about earthquakes were blissfully unaware. By midday, the tribe had partially rebuilt their shelters, though the improvements were marginal at best. They learned a few key lessons: never overcomplicate a roof, always account for mudslides, and, most importantly, avoid ambitious construction during storms. The combination of natural disasters, gravity, and human error had proven an effective teacher. But even as the sun dried the mud and the valley settled into uneasy calm, Gronk sensed that the universe's curriculum was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, venomous creatures stirred, hidden pitfalls awaited, and minor missteps could result in severe consequences, or worse. Tomorrow promised a new kind of chaos. Encounters with snakes, scorpions, and the small, deadly irritations of prehistoric life that had a talent for turning curiosity into catastrophe. As the tribe huddled under partially intact shelters, sharing warmth, laughter, and stories of their near misses, Gronk reflected on the absurdity and brilliance of life in the Stone Age. Each day was a lesson in improvisation, humor, and survival, and each misadventure was a story that would be retold around fires for generations, or at least until someone tripped over a vine and ruined the tale. If you thought collapsing shelters, mudslides, and relentless storms were dangerous enough, wait until the tribe faces the next challenge: venomous encounters and hidden hazards, where tiny creatures, sharp rocks, and an overconfident curiosity create chaos in ways both hilarious and horrifying. The valley was quiet, almost deceptively so. After storms and collapsing shelters, the tribe might have hoped for a moment of peace. Instead, nature, with its peculiar sense of humor, decided it was time to introduce a new lesson: the small and venomous creatures lurking in the shadows. Big predators, after all, made for dramatic encounters, but survival was just as often undone by something tiny, slippery, and capable of turning a careless step into a death sentence. The morning began innocently enough. Dew clung to the grass, the air smelled faintly of damp earth, and the tribe moved cautiously, their bodies sore from a night of mud and makeshift repairs. Gronk trudged to the riverbank, muttering about his aching back, when he nearly placed his foot on what appeared to be a stick. Only it wasn't. The stick hissed. Gronk leapt backward, arms flailing, producing a noise that could best be described as half warrior cry, half terrified goat. The snake, disturbed from its coiled rest, raised its head. Its tongue flickered, tasting the air, unimpressed by the lumbering creatures surrounding it. Drock, ever the self-proclaimed hero, grabbed a rock and prepared to throw. Gronk shouted a warning, translated roughly as, "That's a terrible idea." But Drock hurled anyway. The rock bounced off the ground, missing the snake entirely, and instead startled it into striking. The tribe scattered in a chaotic blur, slipping on wet grass, shouting, and narrowly avoiding disaster. The snake slithered back into the undergrowth, victorious. It was in moments like these that the tribe realized their greatest enemy was not the saber-toothed tiger, not the mammoth, but the environment itself. A living, breathing gauntlet of hazards. Gronk sighed, rubbing his temples, aware that survival required not only strength but vigilance. The irony, of course, was that vigilance was hard to maintain when you were hungry, tired, and constantly distracted by flying mud, collapsing sticks, and overly enthusiastic children. Later that day, Zala decided to forage for berries. Foraging, in theory, was safe pick fruit, chew, and hope it wasn't poisonous. In practice, it meant distinguishing between edible treasures and plants that turned your stomach into a war zone. The child observer trailed behind, fascinated by everything, including a bright cluster of mushrooms glowing faintly at the base of a tree. He plucked one proudly and offered it to Zala, who promptly smacked it out of his hand. The mushroom landed with a squelch, releasing a faint, unsettling odor. Gronk wrinkled his nose. It smelled like the combination of rotten eggs, wet fur, and bad decisions. Still, mistakes were inevitable. One of the younger hunters sampled a leaf that looked tasty, and spent the next several hours curled in pain, groaning and sweating, while the others debated whether this was punishment from the gods or just terrible judgment. Drock, attempting to comfort him, declared confidently that he would test another leaf for comparison. Gronk stopped him, pointing out that repeating the experiment wasn't science, it was suicide. As the day wore on, hidden dangers revealed themselves in increasingly creative ways. Scorpions concealed under rocks emerged when firewood was gathered, their pincers clicking ominously. One unlucky member reached too quickly, received a sting, and proceeded to dance wildly, clutching his hand and shouting a string of noises that could easily be mistaken for an early attempt at heavy metal lyrics. Zala applied a poultice of crushed leaves and spit, which may or may not have helped, but certainly made the victim smell more herbal than before. The river, too, held its perils. Fish with sharp spines lurked in the shallows, capable of piercing careless feet. Gronk, stepping carefully, still managed to yelp when one grazed his ankle. He cursed loudly, splashing water everywhere, while Drock laughed, only to immediately slip on a wet rock and land face first in the river. The child observer clapped, delighted by the slapstick. Gronk, dripping and irritated, muttered about how modern shoes would have solved half of prehistory's problems. Even insects joined the conspiracy. Clouds of mosquitoes descended, biting relentlessly. The tribe swatted and slapped, smearing mud on their skin as makeshift protection. The buzzing was incessant, a high-pitched chorus that drove even the calmest members to the brink. Drock attempted to cover himself in leaves, which only attracted more insects, turning him into a walking salad buffet. Gronk tried smoke, waving a smoldering branch, only to choke and cough while the mosquitoes feasted undeterred. Then came the spiders. Hidden in crevices, dangling from branches, They struck terror with their sudden movements and unsettling size. One particularly bold specimen crawled into a half-repaired shelter, sending its occupants screaming into the night. Gronk, attempting to intervene, grabbed a stick and tried to prod the intruder, only to have it leap directly onto his arm. What followed was a flailing dance, complete with shouting, stomping, and a series of graceless tumbles that left him sprawled in the mud. The spider, unharmed, scuttled away, leaving Gronk humiliated and itchy. By evening, the tribe was battered not by claws or fangs but by stings, bites, and sheer exasperation. Around the fire, they compared wounds like badges of honor. One had a swollen hand from a scorpion, another sported a rash from poisonous plants, and Gronk nursed a collection of mosquito bites that resembled a primitive map of the valley. Drock, predictably, claimed he had been bitten the most and therefore was the bravest. Zola rolled her eyes so hard it nearly counted as a new form of communication. Yet, amidst the chaos, survival persisted. The tribe learned, slowly, that some plants soothed stings, that smoke repelled some insects, and that stepping carefully saved toes. Knowledge earned through bruises and bites became their greatest weapon. Still, every small victory was offset by another mishap, another misstep, another reminder that nature delighted in finding new ways to humble them. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars glittered above, the valley seemed peaceful again. But Gronk knew better. He knew the silence hid dangers yet unseen, that beneath rocks and roots lay countless tiny threats waiting for the next careless hand or foot. He closed his eyes, exhausted, muttering something that loosely translated to, "If tomorrow isn't worse, I'll be surprised." And indeed, worse was waiting. Not the stings of scorpions or the bites of mosquitoes, but something far grander, the chaos of fire itself. For when humans first played with flames, they discovered both salvation and catastrophe in equal measure. If you thought venomous creatures and poisonous plants were dangerous, wait until you see what happens when the tribe discovers that fire, while warm and comforting, can also turn an entire camp into a blazing lesson in why curiosity was both their greatest gift and their dumbest mistake. Fire. A word that would eventually symbolize warmth, protection, and civilization itself. But to our wary, bruised, and bug-bitten tribe, fire was not yet a word. It was a mysterious force glimpsed only from a distance. Lightning storms lit trees ablaze, wildfires swept across the hills, and smoke curled against the horizon like the breath of angry gods. They had seen it, smelled it, feared it. Now, for the first time, they were about to bring it into their own hands. Spoiler, it did not go smoothly. The discovery began with an accident, as most important things in human history tend to. Drock, ever restless and armed with far too much confidence, rubbed two sticks together in a fit of boredom. He wasn't trying to invent anything. He was trying to prove that the sticks, in his hands, could defeat boredom. Gronk, watching from a distance, muttered that Drock was more likely to give himself splinters than achieve anything useful. But as the sun dipped, and shadows stretched across the valley, a faint curl of smoke rose from the friction. The tribe gasped. Smoke. This was no ordinary dust or dirt cloud. Drock, stunned by his own accidental genius, shouted triumphantly, which startled him so much that he nearly dropped the sticks. The smoke vanished. The others groaned. Drock scrambled, rubbed again, and to his amazement the smoke returned, this time joined by a tiny orange flicker. The tribe froze. The flicker danced, hungry alive. Zola stepped closer, eyes wide. The child observer clapped, delighted at the glowing spark. Drock puffed his chest, certain he was now some sort of chosen hero, destined to lead humanity into a new golden age. Then the flicker leapt. The dry grass caught instantly, flaring into a blaze so sudden that half the tribe screamed and stumbled backward. Drock screamed too, though less out of fear than out of sheer disbelief that the thing he made was now trying to kill him. He flailed, grabbed a branch, and tried to swat at the fire like it was a mosquito. This, of course, only spread it. Within moments the ground smoked, sparks popped, and the tribe fled in chaotic circles. The fire eventually burned itself out in a blackened patch of earth, leaving everyone panting, coughing, and staring at the charred remains. Silence fell. The miracle had appeared, and the miracle had nearly consumed them. Gronk was the first to break the silence. He pointed at Drock and muttered something equivalent to, "Idiot, genius." But despite the near disaster, curiosity outweighed fear. The tribe wanted more. Carefully under Gronk's cautious supervision, they tried again. Smoke, spark, flame. This time, they surrounded it with stones, learning that the hungry orange beast could be tamed if given boundaries. They fed it twigs, then branches, marveling as the light danced against their faces. Warmth spread through the night, chasing away the chill. The shadows retreated. For the first time, the tribe sat in comfort after sundown. It was a revelation. They roasted meat instead of gnawing it raw. They laughed as the child observer held a stick into the flames, creating the world's first marshmallow-free campfire skewer. They sang, or rather, made noises that vaguely resembled singing, while sparks drifted into the night sky. For once, life seemed good. Naturally, this did not last. The trouble began when Drock decided that he, being the discoverer of fire, should wield it like a weapon. He grabbed a flaming branch, brandishing it with the swagger of a man who had just invented both the sword and the lightsaber. He waved it at the darkness, shouting bravely at shadows. Unfortunately, embers flew from the torch and landed in the tribe's freshly repaired shelter. A soft crackle became a hiss, then a whoosh. Within seconds, their roof was aflame. The tribe panicked. Water! They shouted the equivalent of throw water, but of course, no one had prepared buckets. Gronk shouted, gestured wildly, and eventually resorted to slapping the fire with furs. This only created smoke so thick that the tribe coughed and stumbled blindly. Finally, in desperation, they pushed the shelter itself into the river. It hissed, sizzled, and floated away in soggy defeat. The night ended with the tribe huddled miserably around the surviving fire, shivering in damp furs, staring at the glowing embers of their half-destroyed home. Drock avoided everyone's eyes, muttering about unpredictable consequences of genius. But the next morning, they returned to the flames with renewed determination. Fire wasn't just dangerous, it was powerful. It cooked food, it scared away predators, it gave warmth. They learned to keep it alive by feeding it, guarding it like a sacred pet. One member even whispered to it, convinced it was a spirit that must be pleased. Another tried to carry a burning stick all day like a torch of prestige, only to drop it on his own foot and hop around in agony. The real disasters came in waves. First was the problem of smoke. They built fires inside their shelters to stay warm, only to discover that smoke had nowhere to go. Within minutes, eyes burned, throats choked, and the tribe stumbled outside, coughing violently. Lesson learned of ventilation mattered. Of course, it took 3 more suffocating attempts before they truly believed this. Next came the fascination with burning objects. The child observer, curious, threw everything he could find into the flames: sticks, bones, old furs, berries, even a prized carved stone. Some items burned, some exploded, and one, the berries, released such a foul stench that everyone abandoned the fire for an hour. Drock laughed until he realized his favorite spear had also been sacrificed to curiosity. And then there was the night of the great hair fire. One member leaned too close, his wild mane catching like dry grass. Panic ensued. People screamed, water was flung, and the poor fellow ended up half bald but alive, smelling distinctly of roasted goat. From then on, the tribe developed an instinctive habit of patting their heads whenever they sat near the flames. Still, fire became their constant companion. It turned nights from cold misery into gatherings of warmth and light. Stories grew longer, laughter louder, and shadows less frightening. Predators circled farther away, unwilling to challenge the glowing guardian. Even Gronk admitted that this strange, dangerous gift was worth the trouble. Yet the disasters kept pace with the triumphs. Sparks set grass ablaze more than once, forcing the tribe into frantic, barefoot stomping sessions. One careless sleeper rolled too close to the fire and woke up shrieking with a smoldering fur. Drock attempted to impress Zala by juggling flaming branches, earning burns, blisters, and absolutely no admiration. Through it all, the tribe learned. Slowly, painfully, humorously, fire demanded respect, and respect was not a trait the tribe easily mastered. But inch by inch, bruise by bruise, they carved out an understanding. Fire was not just a tool. It was a companion, an enemy, a test, and perhaps, in some way they could not yet articulate, a symbol of their future. On the final night of that season, the tribe sat around their fire, battered but proud. Sparks rose into the sky, mingling with the stars. They were no longer creatures huddled in the dark. They had claimed light. They had claimed warmth. They had claimed a fragile step toward the strange destiny of humankind. Of course, destiny had a sense of humor. For even as they marveled at their glowing prize, the child observer dragged a flaming stick toward a pile of dried grass, curious what would happen. But that is another disaster for another day. The fire had been mastered. Well, mastered. In the sense that the tribe had not yet burned down their entire valley, which was progress. But fire, as it turned out, created a new problem. People now wanted to sit closer to it. Very close. Too close. And with closeness came quarrels. The sparks that rose into the sky at night were nothing compared to the sparks of irritation among the tribe. The trouble began with seating arrangements. Firelight was precious, warmth even more so, and suddenly everyone felt they deserved the best spot. Zala insisted she should sit nearest, because she gathered the driest firewood. Gronk claimed his age gave him priority. Drock, naturally, believed as the discoverer of fire, he should always sit in the prime seat, which he had personally defined as exactly in the middle where everyone can admire me. Arguments rose. Voices echoed. One evening, the dispute grew so heated that two men physically wrestled for position. They rolled dangerously near the flames, scattering embers and causing another brief panic in which half the tribe shouted, "Put it out!" while the other half shouted, "Don't let it go out." It was in that smoky confusion that something new emerged. Order. Gronk, coughing from the haze, stood up and declared something that, in rough translation, amounted to "Nuff. We need rules, rules." The word was strange, unfamiliar, but the tribe, wary of coughing, shoving, and hair fires, agreed. And so, beneath the flickering light of their miraculous blaze, humanity's earliest justice system was born. Of course, being the first attempt at law, it was as clumsy as a newborn mammoth. Rule 1: no sitting too close to the fire unless you earned it. Rule 2: don't throw things into the fire unless everyone agrees it should be thrown. Rule 3: don't steal food from someone's pile unless they're asleep, in which case it doesn't count. Naturally, these laws caused more arguments than they solved. Take Rule 1. Who earned the right to sit close? Zala insisted firewood gatherers always earned it. Drock said inventors always earned it. A third man argued hunters earned it, since without meat there would be nothing to roast. After an hour of shouting, the fire burned dangerously low, because no one remembered to feed it. Rule 2 didn't fare much better. The child observer, gleeful in his mischief, kept throwing things into the flames anyway, sticks, furs, and once, an unfortunate lizard. Each time, the tribe debated whether he should be punished. The punishment, however, was never agreed upon. Should he fetch more wood? Should he give up his food? Should he simply be whacked with a stick? In the end, he escaped all consequences by making such pitiful faces that even Gronk gave up. And Rule 3. Well, Rule 3 became the heart of the tribe's nightly drama. Food theft was rampant. Hunters complained their carefully caught rabbits disappeared overnight. Gatherers swore their berries were dwindling suspiciously. Drock, who was far too lazy to hunt or gather, mysteriously never went hungry. It was only a matter of time before justice grew violent. One night, a man awoke to catch another chewing on his roasted rabbit leg. He howled, the thief howled back, and the two launched into what history would later call trial by combat. Except this trial consisted mostly of clumsy slaps, hair pulling, and rolling on the ground until someone coughed up dirt. The tribe watched, unimpressed, until Zola broke it up with a stick. That night, Gronk declared the tribe needed a proper enforcer. Someone who would keep order, judge disputes, and settle quarrels. He called it leader, though what he meant was someone who tells others what to do while pretending it's for everyone's good. Naturally, he assumed he should be that person. But Drock, ever ambitious, loudly disagreed. Why should Gronk lead? Wasn't he the one who had given humanity the gift of fire? Didn't he deserve the honor? A heated argument followed, escalating until half the tribe backed Gronk, the other half Drock. It seemed the tribe might split forever into rival camps, until Zala stepped forward, holding a rabbit carcass. She tore the rabbit in half, handed each man a piece, and declared that both should lead. A collective groan rose. Two leaders. It was like having two drummers in the same band, forever fighting over rhythm. But for the moment, it calmed the quarrel. Gronk and Drock became co-leaders, glaring at each other, but too proud to refuse. Their first act was to invent punishments. If someone broke a rule, they must fetch wood or give up food, or, if the crime was serious, sit farthest from the fire all night. This last punishment was so dreaded that it instantly reduced arguments. No one wanted to shiver in the cold darkness, listening to wolves howl. Humanity's first prison sentence had been born, except instead of bars it was simply distance from comfort. But justice remained inconsistent. When Zala threw bones into the fire, Drock declared it fine. When another tried it, Gronk barked, punishable. The tribe quickly realized that rules weren't really rules. They were excuses for leaders to argue. Still, for all its absurdity, this proto-justice system held. Fires were less often toppled, food disputes slightly fewer, and only 3 hair fires occurred that season. By caveman standards, this was civilization. And so, beneath the smoky glow, humanity discovered not only fire but order, rules, punishment, and leadership. Were they good at it? Absolutely not. But the seed was planted. Someday these chaotic squabbles would evolve into kings, councils, courts, and bureaucracies so complex even modern humans groan at them. For now, it was just Drock, Gronk, Zala, and a tribe doing their best not to claw each other to death over seating arrangements. Yet if they thought rules were hard, they hadn't yet discovered the chaos of the hunt. Fire and law had changed their nights, but what about their days? The wilderness still waited, filled with beasts far larger and hungrier than humans. And so the tribe's next lesson would not be about comfort or fairness, but survival, armed with nothing more than sticks, stones, and their own questionable judgment. The mornings of the tribe always began with hunger. Not polite, civilized hunger like missing breakfast before a meeting. This was the gnawing, stomach, shriveling, dizzy, making kind of hunger that made even bark look appetizing. And in the Stone Age, the only cure for hunger was the hunt. Now, hunting might sound romantic in hindsight. Valiant warriors stalking beasts through misty valleys. In reality, it was several exhausted people with sticks chasing after animals that were faster, stronger, and considerably more annoyed. The tribe's weapons amounted to sharpened rocks, tied to branches with strips of hide, which is like bringing a butter knife to a tank fight. The hunt began with enthusiasm, of course. Drock strutted at the front, waving his spear like a conductor's baton. Gronk trudged behind, muttering that the only thing they'd catch was frostbite. Zola, practical as ever, carried the gathering basket in case this so-called hunt once again failed, and she had to save the day with berries. Their first target was a deer. It grazed peacefully in a meadow, completely unaware that a band of humans was crouching badly behind bushes. "Quiet," hissed Gronk. Immediately, someone sneezed. The deer's head snapped up. In that instant, every member of the tribe froze, trying to look like part of the landscape. Imagine 7 grown adults pretending to be shrubs. It was unconvincing. The deer bolted. Drock screamed and charged after it, arms pumping, legs flailing. The rest of the hunters followed in a chaotic stampede. The chase lasted roughly 30 seconds before everyone collapsed, gasping for breath, while the deer bounded gracefully out of sight. The only thing they caught was the sudden realization that humans were the least athletic species in the valley. But failure never discouraged Drock. "Bigger animal, slower animal," he declared. This was his great theory: if they couldn't catch fast animals, they should hunt huge ones. Enter the mammoth. Spotting one was easy. The massive beasts were practically walking boulders covered in shaggy fur. Catching one was another matter. Drock convinced the tribe to surround it. "We push from all sides," he said. "It will fall over." Gronk stared at him in disbelief. "Fall over? It is mountain with legs." But no one had a better plan. So they tried. The tribe crept toward the mammoth, arms shaking as they gripped their spears. The animal blinked slowly, unimpressed. With a shout, the hunters rushed it, jabbing and yelling. The mammoth snorted, flapped its ears, and swatted its trunk with the indifference of a god brushing away gnats. One swing knocked Drock flying into a bush. Another sent 2 others tumbling into the mud. The mammoth trumpeted, stomped once, and lumbered away, leaving the tribe sprawled like broken twigs. Zola, who had wisely stayed at the edge, sighed. She dropped her basket and began collecting mushrooms. Dinner, once again, would be vegetarian. But even mushrooms had their risks. The tribe had not yet mastered the art of distinguishing edible from hallucinogenic, from lethal. More than once, the evening meal ended with half the tribe clutching their stomachs, moaning, while the other half lay giggling at the stars, convinced they were being carried into the sky by giant birds. Still, the hunters tried again. Their next idea: pit traps. The theory was simple. Dig a big hole, cover it with branches, let an animal fall in. Reality was less kind. First, the digging took days, with everyone blistered and cursing. Then, when the pit was finally ready, they disguised it with branches and waited. And waited. Hours passed. Days. No animal came near. Finally, out of sheer boredom, Drock wandered across the trap and promptly fell in. The tribe peered into the pit to see their proud leader, groaning at the bottom, covered in twigs. After much debate, they hauled him out, only for Gronk to mutter, "Trap works. Just wrong prey." From then on, the pit remained an unspoken embarrassment, avoided at all costs. Yet hunger gnawed, and desperation fueled invention. Spears were sharpened, rocks hurled, even crude slings attempted. None of it worked. Animals continued to outrun, outsmart, or outright bully the hunters. Wolves circled at night, eyeing the tribe as if to say, "You're not predators. You're snacks." Then came the infamous boar incident. A fat wild boar rooted near the camp, blissfully unaware. Drock declared it the perfect target. "Small mammoth," he called it. The hunters crept close. At Drock's signal they leapt, spears stabbing. The boar squealed furiously and charged. Suddenly the hunters became the hunted. Chaos erupted. Spears flew in random directions, one hitting a tree, another lodging into a fur cloak. The boar barreled straight into Gronk, flipping him onto his back like a stunned turtle. The tribe scattered. Some scrambled up trees, others dove into bushes. Drock, true to form, ran in circles screaming until the boar clipped his leg, sending him sprawling. Eventually, the furious animal lost interest and trotted away, leaving the hunters bruised, bleeding and humiliated. That night's meal, mushrooms again. Despite failures the tribe learned in their clumsy way. They discovered cooperation helped. One distracted an animal while others crept closer. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the distractor simply got mauled while the others fled. Still, each disaster carved knowledge into their bones. Knowledge that someday, many generations later, would become strategy. But for this tribe, the hunt remained less about triumph and more about survival comedy. They were too slow for deer, too weak for mammoths, too clumsy for boars. Yet somehow, despite everything, they lived. Barely. The secret was persistence. Hunt after hunt, failure after failure. They refused to stop trying. Hunger demanded effort, even if the effort ended in bruises and laughter. And so, the days rolled on. Running after animals they could never catch, inventing traps that only trapped themselves, and learning slowly, painfully, hilariously, what it meant to be human hunters. But if they thought chasing animals was bad, they had not yet faced their most absurd challenge, finding ways to treat the wounds left behind. For in the next stage of their chaotic journey, the tribe would stumble into the strange, dangerous world of early medicine, where the cure was often worse than the injury. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that by now the tribe was essentially held together with smoke, stubbornness, and a truly baffling tolerance for pain. Hunting left them battered, fire left them blistered, and arguments left them bruised, which naturally led to the question, what did cavemen do when they got hurt? Answer: they improvised. Badly. The first treatment of choice was always spitting on it. Scraped your knee, spit. Burned your hand, spit. Got trampled by a boar, spit, then spit some more. They believed saliva carried mysterious healing power, which, in fairness, it does contain a few helpful enzymes, but not nearly enough to reattach a tooth or close a spear wound. Drock once attempted to heal a deep gash on his arm this way, only to sit miserably while half the tribe lined up to contribute spit. He did not appreciate the communal effort. If spitting didn't work, and it never did, the next strategy was mud. Slap on a big handful of wet dirt, and suddenly your open wound had turned into a delightful breeding ground for bacteria. Gronk swore by it, claiming the earth would pull out the bad spirits. What it mostly pulled in were infections. Several hunters ended up with swollen limbs that looked like overripe gourds. Herbs were another popular remedy, though identifying which plants actually helped was a deadly guessing game. Zola, ever the experimenter, chewed leaves and rubbed them on burns, hoping for relief. Sometimes it worked cooling, soothing. Other times it caused rashes, hallucinations, or, on one memorable occasion, uncontrollable sneezing fits that lasted 3 days. To the tribe, this was proof the plant was strong medicine. And then there were the bones. Yes, bones. One bright day, someone decided that tying animal bones around the injured body part would channel the beast's strength. Sprained ankle. Tie on a rabbit bone. Broken arm, lash on a deer femur. It looked less like medicine and more like the patient had been mugged by a butcher. But oddly enough, the splints sometimes kept limbs straight, which meant occasionally this ridiculous practice worked by accident. The real spectacle, though, was surgery, or what passed for it. A tribe member once cracked his skull, falling out of a tree, and in desperation. The others chipped away at the bone with sharp stones, convinced they were letting the bad spirits escape. Incredibly, the poor fellow survived, though he spent the rest of his days slightly cross-eyed and muttering to himself. The tribe declared the operation a miracle. Modern historians call it trepanation. We might call it, please don't ever try this. Of course, no medical system is complete without charms and rituals. Healers, usually whoever looked the most serious while holding a stick, waved smoke over wounds, muttered nonsense, and declared the spirits satisfied. If the patient recovered, the healer took credit. If they died, well, clearly the spirits had been too angry to bargain with. Despite the absurdity, something remarkable was happening. Each mistake, each failure, was teaching them. Spit might not cure, but washing with water sometimes helped. Mud infected wounds, but clay soothed burns. Bones strapped as splints actually aligned healing limbs. Through endless trial and error, emphasis on the error, they were stumbling toward medicine. Still, most cures were worse than the disease, and the tribe, battered, coughing, limping, and sneezing, pressed on. They didn't know it, but in their fumbling hands lay the fragile beginnings of healing. Science's first, clumsy breaths. But if you think medicine was messy, wait until you see what happened when the tribe decided to decorate themselves. Because after pain came vanity, and vanity, as always, would prove hilarious. By now the tribe had survived fires, beasts, rocks, and their own medicine. But what truly separated them from the animals wasn't tools, wasn't fire, it was vanity. One day, after noticing his reflection in a puddle, Gronk decided his hair needed style. With no comb in sight, he grabbed a fish bone and scraped it through his tangled mane until it stood in spikes. The tribe gasped. Clearly, this was the new standard of beauty. Within days, everyone looked like they had lost a fight with a hedgehog. Clothing was no better. Animal skins were practical, yes, but suddenly practicality wasn't enough. Zala draped hers at an angle, creating the first prehistoric fashion statement. Naturally, the others followed, though some interpreted the look less as chic and more as wearing a dead goat sideways. Still, a trend was born. Paint soon entered the picture. Crushed berries, ground up ochre, even smeared ash. Anything with color became decoration. Warriors strutted around with streaks of red across their cheeks, convinced it made them fearsome. In truth, it made them look like toddlers who had lost a battle with jam. Yet the confidence was unmatched. Some even painted their teeth black for intimidation, which worked. Mostly because everyone assumed their mouths were rotting. Piercings were next. A daring soul shoved a bone through his ear, declaring himself stronger for it. The tribe was impressed, until he lay awake all night howling, because his infected ear swelled to the size of a walnut. But fashion, as ever, demanded sacrifice. By the following moon, half the hunters had lopsided, swollen ears, and an inexplicable sense of pride. And then came jewelry. Teeth strung on sinew, shells threaded on cords, shiny pebbles carried like treasures. Drock once attempted to impress a mate by wearing 20 squirrel tails around his neck. She was not impressed. The tails smelled like well-dead squirrels. Yet he wore them proudly, swaying with every step, the first caveman runway model. In truth, these early stabs at style were less about beauty and more about identity. The tribe, for the first time, wasn't just surviving, they were expressing. Awkwardly, clumsily, often hilariously. But expression all the same. Vanity, it turns out, is one of humanity's oldest instincts. And so, history began not just with fire or stone, but with the universal truth people will always try to look cooler than they actually are. From hedgehog hair to squirrel tail necklaces, The cavemen left behind more than bones and tools. They left the first, glorious proof that humans have always been ridiculous.